Good morning to everyone. And today we are starting a new video program, MEI Conversations. And the first one we are going to discuss on the Israel-Hamas conflict. And the ceasefire has just come into force earlier on Friday. And to tell us more about it, we have with us our great friend, Dr. Joseph Kéchichian. He is presently the senior fellow at the King Faisal Center for Religion and Islamic Studies, Riyadh, but is fortunately for us based in Beirut. So he's going to tell us from the closer point of view, from close almost to the ground zero situation, and he's going to tell us his understanding and reading of the conflict and its repercussions. Welcome, Dr. Joseph Kéchichian.
Thank you very much. My pleasure to be with you.
The ceasefire has come into force early on Friday. How do you view this?
Well, after 11 days of bombardments, obviously, eventually there was going to be a ceasefire. The position of both Israel and the Hamas fighters were to take as much advantage as possible, as both of them assuming that they were going to accomplish a great deal. But the ceasefire was inevitable, and the destruction now has stopped. The new phase has now opened. It remains to be determined whether or not the two sides will move from a state of war to a state of negotiating a peace settlement. We are far from that day, but at least the warfare has stopped and the bombardments on both sides have stopped.
Before we go to the negotiation part, both Prime Minister Netanyahu and Hamas leaders claimed victory. Who, in your assessment, actually won the crisis this time?
Neither one is a victor in this particular episode. Of course, we remember that this is not the first time that clashes occurred between Israel and the Hamas fighters. Every few years, we have this episode that is recurring, and the same type of behavior on both sides, rockets being launched by Hamas and Israeli bombardments follow. And this, every time there is a ceasefire, this has been going on for a long period of time. This particular episode now is the first that occurs under the Biden administration in the United States. And it does have an international dimension to it, which is relatively new, because the Biden administration, unlike the Trump administration, has argued that it will put human rights first and that it will pay attention to human rights issues, which presumably apply across the board throughout the world. So time will tell whether or not the Biden administration will continue to put pressure on Israel to come to the negotiating table. But honestly, the Israelis have had casualties. The Palestinians have had casualties on the ground. Gaza is destroyed once again, and it will be rebuilt. There is no question about that. But this is not the kind of victory that anybody can claim just because you have killed more people than I have killed more people. Those are not the kind of victories. And after 58 years of occupation, the Israelis have not been able to deter the Palestinian extremists to actually fight with them. This is something which we ought to really think about. It's been 58 years since 1967. I'm taking 1967 as a benchmark. It's been 58 years of these ongoing crises between the two sides, and the Israelis have not been able to deter. In fact, the Israelis have failed to deter. And now, another dimension which is important is that in the past, the Israelis assumed that they would fight on both the front of Gaza and the West Bank, as well as other confrontation states, whether it was Syria or Lebanon or even Jordan and Egypt. Now that is literally closed. Neither the Lebanese, nor the Syrians, nor the Jordanians, nor the Egyptians have any interest in fighting. And after the Abraham Accords, 4 Gulf countries have joined the two previous Arab countries that established diplomatic relations with Israel, Egypt, and Jordan. Now you have UAE, Bahrain, Morocco and Sudan also joining the peace bandwagon. So therefore, a lot of things are changing in the area. There are no victors here. The only losers are the people who are dead, and they're not going to come back. There are lots of losers. Politically, of course, both Hamas has been extremely weakened. They cannot claim victory, politically speaking. They have been really weakened because the Biden administration wants to work with President Mahmoud Abbas, in order to rebuild Gaza, not with Hamas. And the Netanyahu government is also weakened because even though they killed a lot of people, that doesn't mean that Netanyahu has emerged as the victor in the domestic Israeli politics against Lapid and others. So we will have to wait and see how both sides will take matters further. But there are no victors here, in my humble opinion.
You mentioned about Palestinian National Authority. Did the conflict strengthen the Palestinian Authority or weaken vis-a-vis Hamas?
Well, the Palestinian Authority is already pretty weak, and it has not been able. Mahmoud Abbas and his crowd have not been able to impose themselves on Hamas. Hamas exists; it's underground, and it is very popular. It has all these rockets. According to Israeli sources, 4,000 rockets were launched from Gaza on Israel. Of course, the Israelis probably launched 40,000 missiles, Navy, Air Force, land forces, and so on. But Hamas is there. Hamas cannot be ignored. Mahmoud Abbas, the president of the PA, has got to come to terms with them. Now, this is an opportunity for him to actually come to the table with Hamas and say to Hamas, look, every time you do this, we are losing more and more. And it is time for us to abandon the warfare option and to go to the negotiating option. Unfortunately, Mahmoud Abbas cannot do this by himself. He needs a partner. He doesn't have a partner. He doesn't have an Israeli partner. Under the Trump administration, he did not have an American partner. The Europeans, what can you say about them? They cannot do anything. So therefore, Abbas is alone, and he needs help. He needs assistance. He needs push. He needs an ally within Israel, people who are willing to actually talk with Abbas on a one-to-one basis, and he needs American support. Whether the Biden administration now will come out and say, we want to really help the PA, not just by providing some financial assistance to rebuild Gaza and to help them out, but we really need to help them to negotiate a peace settlement. Will Abbas be able to do this? Will he be able to muzzle the extremists within Hamas? That's the big question that we have no answer for.
Now, Dr. Kéchichian, you mentioned about the negotiations. Do you visualize a possibility that Hamas, in some form or the other, can be a negotiating partner in the overall settlement?
It's inevitable. There is no alternative. In other words, you have two options here. If you are Hamas, you either have a perpetual war against a power that is a zillion times more powerful than you are, not a million times, not a billion times, but a zillion times more powerful, which means you will always lose militarily. That's option one. Or the other option is that you take matters into your own hands and say, we want to come to terms politically with a permanent solution. Now, the permanent solution is not for us to determine. It's for them to determine. That is, the Palestinians and the Israelis have got to get together and agree on some kind of a settlement, whether it's a two-state settlement or something else. That's for them to decide, not for us to decide. But there are no other options. This has been going on for now a long time. And the Israelis have failed to deter. The Palestinians, especially the extremist Hamas, have failed to actually win militarily on the ground. Not just Hamas, by the way. All the other confrontation states, the Syrians have lost, Hezbollah in Lebanon has lost, everybody else has lost. So therefore, there are no other options. Hamas must be brought in to the negotiating table, but it can only do so through the PA and Mahmoud Abbas, because that is the legitimately recognized institutional framework that people can actually invest in. Short of that, by themselves, they cannot do anything. Final point on this, which is very important, in my humble opinion, is that Hamas has the backing of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards. And we always forget, where do these rockets come from? These are not landing as gifts, manna from heaven, as our Jewish friends will say. This is coming, most of them are coming from Iran. Of course, they themselves can manufacture little ones, but most of it is coming from Iran. And as long as the Iranians are playing this game, this is not going to end. And Hamas will continue to impose itself as much as possible. So that's why I think that the Israelis have no choice but to come to terms with Hamas through the PA, because with the PA you can talk. With the Hamas and the Iranians, it's much more difficult.